You'll be amazed at how things escalated between two people who should have known better. It's one of those stories you hear and think, that could never happen to me. Well, it did happen to someone I know, and let me tell you, it rocked their family to the core. This is how a simple visit from a friend turned into something way more complicated. Stay tuned because things get intense really fast. Before we continue, don't forget to like and subscribe for more videos like this. It all started on a quiet weekend. Lisa was a regular mom, busy with the daily routine, balancing work, family, and everything in between. Her son Ethan had been excited all week because his best friend Mark was coming over for the weekend. They hadn't seen each other in months since Mark moved to another city for college. Mark wasn't just any friend, he practically grew up in their house. He was the kind of kid who had always been around, polite, respectful, and well-mannered. Lisa had known Mark since he was a little boy, so when Ethan invited him over, she was delighted to have him stay. Everything seemed normal that Friday evening. They ordered pizza, watched a movie, and laughed like old times. Mark was no longer that awkward teenager. Lisa remembered he had matured, become confident, articulate, and charming. She noticed these changes, but she wasn't blind. She could tell he had grown into an attractive young man, but she brushed off those thoughts as silly. The first night passed without a hitch. But then Saturday morning arrived and things took an unexpected turn. Lisa was in the kitchen making breakfast. She was wearing her usual weekend attire. Nothing fancy, just comfortable loungewear. She wasn't thinking much about her appearance. Then Mark walked in. He was already awake, standing there with a sleepy smile, thanking her for letting him stay over. "Mark, you're practically family," she replied, pouring him a cup of coffee. What was supposed to be a casual conversation became something else. Mark leaned on the counter, his eyes locking on Lisa's in a way that made her heart started racing. It wasn't inappropriate, but there was something there. A vibe, a connection, something unspoken. She could feel it, and she hated that she noticed. Lisa quickly brushed it off, forcing a laugh. "You've changed a lot, Mark. You're all grown up now." He smiled. "You're still the same, Lisa. Maybe even better." Lisa felt a blush creeping up her neck. She told herself it was just a harmless compliment. Nothing more. But that comment stayed with her longer than it should have. The day went on, and Lisa couldn't shake the weird energy between them. She told herself she was imagining it after all. Mark was just a kid, a family friend. But every time their paths crossed, there was a tension she hadn't felt in years. By evening, Lisa was on edge. Ethan and Mark decided to play video games, so Lisa retreated to her room, hoping to clear her head. But the house felt different. And T now charged like something was about to happen. She didn't know what, but she could feel it coming. That evening, Lisa tried to distract herself by scrolling through her phone, but she couldn't focus. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Mark's face, the way he smiled at her, the way his eyes lingered just a second too long. He felt ridiculous. "This is just Ethan's friend," she told herself. "You're overthinking it." But when she went downstairs to grab a glass of water, things got worse. The living room lights were dimmed. Ethan had gone to bed, but Mark was still up. Mark was sitting on the couch with his phone in hand when he saw Lisa. He put his phone down and smiled. He said he couldn't sleep either. He asked Lisa if she wanted to chat. She was a bit hesitant, but she didn't want to make it awkward. She said she just needed some water. She tried to keep her tone light and casual, but she could feel the tension creeping in again. Mark said, "Why don't you sit for a minute?" He patted the cushion next to him. He said, "We haven't really talked in years." Lisa hesitated, but then she reasoned that it was harmless. She decided he was right. It had been a long time since they'd talked like this. She sat down, keeping a safe distance, and asked how college was going. Mark laughed softly. "It's been great, but I miss the comfort of home. There's something about being here that makes everything feel simple." He looked at her and his eyes softened. Part of her couldn't ignore how personal it sounded. "We all miss you too," she said, shifting uncomfortably. "It's nice having you around again." Mark smiled, but this time it wasn't just friendly. It was warm and intimate. "You've always been the best," Lisa said. "The way you take care of everyone is special. I don't think I've ever told you how much I admire that." Lisa swallowed hard. She could feel herself blushing. "Thank you," she said. "That's sweet. Thank you for saying that." She stood up quickly, hoping to end the moment. "I should head to bed. It's going to be a long day tomorrow." Mark stood too, and for a second they were standing close. He looked at her, his expression unreadable. "Good night, Lisa," he said softly, his voice lingering. Lisa nodded and hurried upstairs. Her heart was racing. She felt guilty, like she had done something wrong, even though nothing had happened. But there was no denying it now. Something was there between them, something dangerous. As she lay in bed, she replayed the moment. Over and over, she couldn't let this go any further. It was wrong, she knew that, but a part of her, a small reckless part, was drawn to it. The next day, Lisa woke up determined to put the previous night behind her. She avoided being alone with Mark and kept the conversation light and focused on Ethan, but Mark wasn't making it easy. He was attentive, always finding reasons to be near her, always offering little compliments that left her flustered. By afternoon, Lisa was exhausted. Tired from pretending everything was fine, she decided to take a break and step outside for some fresh air. But as soon as she walked onto the porch, Mark followed. He asked. His voice was gentle. Lisa nodded, but she didn't meet his eyes. Yeah, she just needed a breather. Mark stepped closer. "You've been acting weird today. Did I do something wrong?" Lisa finally looked at him. "Mark, we need to talk. Whatever's going on between us, it needs to stop. This isn't right." Mark's face fell, but he didn't back away. "I know I feel it too, but I don't want to stop. I've felt this way for a long time." Lisa's breath caught. She hadn't expected him to be so direct. "Mark, this is crazy. You're Ethan's friend. You're too young for this." He shook his head. "I'm not a kid anymore. Lisa, you know that." She couldn't deny it. He wasn't a kid, but that didn't make it any less wrong. Before she could, Ethan was coming outside, so Lisa stepped back quickly, her heart pounding. She whispered, "We'll talk later," and turned away just as he appeared. Mark nodded, his expression unreadable, but the conversation wasn't over. Lisa spent the rest of the day avoiding Mark. She busied herself with chores and errands to keep her mind off what happened, but it wasn't working. Every time she saw him, even from a distance, her heart betrayed her, pounding in her chest. Like that evening, Lisa was a teenager with a forbidden crush. She decided to make an early dinner, hoping the family setting would diffuse the tension. Ethan was chatting about school, completely oblivious to the undercurrent between his mother and his best friend. Lisa tried to focus on her son's words, but her mind kept drifting. Mark was quiet throughout dinner, which made things worse. She could feel his eyes on her, even when she wasn't looking. She hated how aware she was of him, every movement, every glance felt loaded. Dinner. Ethan suggested they watch a movie. Lisa was almost ready to agree, but Mark stood up first. "I'm going to take a walk to clear my head," he said casually. Lisa froze. She knew he was asking her to follow without saying it, but she stayed seated, not wanting to look suspicious. "You're not staying for the movie?" Ethan asked. "Nah, I need some air." "I'll be back soon," Mark replied, giving Lisa a fleeting look. Lisa forced a smile and focused on clearing the table. Her hands shook as she loaded the dishwasher and knew what she had to do. She needed to stay inside, stay with Ethan, and ignore whatever was happening between her and Mark. But 10 minutes later, she found herself stepping outside, drawn by something she couldn't explain. Mark was waiting at the edge of the driveway, leaning against the fence. He turned when he heard her footsteps. "I wasn't sure you'd come," he said softly. Lisa hugged her arms across her chest, standing a few feet away. "Mark, this has to stop," she said. "I mean it," he said, nodding. His eyes were serious. "I know, I just need to talk to you. I really needed to talk. I can't pretend I don't feel this anymore." Lisa shook her head, her throat tightening. "You don't understand. This is wrong. Ethan, your friendship is too much to risk." Mark stepped closer. His voice was steady. "I care about Ethan, but I can't lie about how I feel. I know you feel it too. You can deny it all you want, but it's there." Tears began to form in her eyes as she realized that he was right. She felt it and it terrified her. She whispered, "I'm married." Her voice cracked as she continued, I love my family. I can't. Mark's gaze shifted. She paused, then said, I'm not asking for anything you can't give. I just want you to know how I feel. Lisa took a shaky breath. She wanted to walk away and end this once and for all, but instead she found herself standing there, unable to move. The air between them was thick with everything unsaid. He reached out and brushed her hand with his. It was just a small touch, but it made her feel uneasy. She knew she should have pulled away, but she didn't. Time seemed to stand still and she was alone with Mark. He leaned in and looked at her, searching her eyes for permission. Lisa was torn between wanting to stop and wanting to go further. She closed her eyes, and just as their lips were about to meet, Lisa jerked back and spun around to Ethan, was standing at the door, looking confused. What are you guys doing out here? Lisa's heart dropped. We were just talking, she said quickly, her voice shaking. Ethan needed some advice. He frowned but didn't press the issue. Well, come inside. The movie's starting. Lisa nodded, her pulse increasing. We'll be right there. Ethan went back inside and Lisa turned to Mark. Her eyes were wide with panic. This ends now. Do you hear me? Mark opened his mouth to respond, but Lisa didn't wait. She hurried back into the house, leaving him standing there in the dark. Inside, she tried to act normal, but her mind was spinning. They had come so close. She couldn't let it happen again. She wouldn't, but deep down she wasn't sure if she could resist him next time. Lisa spent the night talking, turning, haunted by what almost happened. She replayed the moment in her mind over and over. Torn between guilt and a strange longing, she didn't fully understand that she needed clarity, but clarity wasn't coming. The next morning she woke up determined to fix everything. She couldn't let one impulsive moment ruin her family. She planned to avoid Mark, focus on Ethan, and make sure the weekend ended without any more complications. But avoiding Mark wasn't easy. He was everywhere, helping Ethan in the kitchen and laughing in the living room. His presence loomed like a shadow. Lisa couldn't shake the feeling that every glance and every accidental touch was charged. She was losing control, and later that afternoon Ethan said he had to run an errand. I'll be back in an hour. You guys, I'm good, he said. Bing his keys. Lisa's heart sank. Do you need me to come with you? She asked. Nah, it's just a quick trip to the store. I'll be back soon, Ethan replied, already heading out the door. As soon as it closed behind him, Lisa's pulse skyrocketed. She and Mark were alone. She busied herself in the kitchen, scrubbing dishes with more force than necessary. Hoping Mark would stay away, but he didn't. Mark, we need to talk. Mark nodded, stepping closer. I know. I took a deep breath, bracing myself for whatever this is. Has to stop. Ethan can't find out. My family can't know. It was a mistake. We need to move past it. Mark frowned but didn't interrupt. He listened, his eyes fixed on her. I get it, Lisa. But you can't. You can't pretend this didn't happen. You felt it just like I did. Denying it won't make it go away. Her resolve wavered, but she held firm. What matters is my family. I can't destroy that. I won't. Mark's jaw tightened. I'm not asking you to destroy anything. I just don't want to pretend like it didn't happen. Lisa shook her head. Her voice broke. We don't have a choice. Mark stared at her for a long moment, then nodded. Okay, if that's what you want. I understand. Relief washed over her, but it was short-lived. She could still feel the tension between them, and it scared her. Just as she was about to turn away, Mark spoke again. If you ever change your mind, you know where to find me. Lisa's breath caught. She knew she should tell him no, make it clear there was no future for them. But she didn't. Instead, she nodded. Ethan couldn't find the words to say, so he went back shortly after. He was oblivious to the storm that had passed in his absence. The rest of the day went by in a blur. Lisa tried to act normal, but her mind was racing. She had drawn a line, but it felt fragile, like it could be crossed at any moment. That night, as she lay in bed, she realized something terrifying. She wasn't just fighting off Mark's feelings. She was fighting her own, and she wasn't sure how much longer she could keep doing it.